Hello, and thank you for joining us again on Vermont Film Essentials. My name is David Metzger.
I'm Devon Ewalt.
We have a special guest with us.
Yes, I'm happy to say that my brother is on the phone. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, this is Matt Ewalt, Devon's brother. Long history of the two of us debating movies over the years, and I'm a fan of the show, so really glad to be able to contribute in some small way today.
Awesome, man.
Thank you very much for joining us, Matt. So we kind of changed gears because this is the first time that we're discussing a modern movie, at least made in the past 20 years. So what about AI, Matt, did you want to get into, and what about this film kind of prompted you to choose it?
I think a couple things for me. One is it's a movie that's been often debated, as I'm sure Spielberg is among a lot of film buffs, but in particular this film that indeed is an idea stemming from one of the absolute masters, Stanley Kubrick, who had this idea for this film for years, and I'm sure we can talk about this in a few minutes, but the idea then of a kind of a film that represents the ideas and style of two filmmakers, but very different filmmakers, and one that I'd argue is one of Spielberg's masterpieces, but by just as many people is often dismissed as a mess of a movie.
So it's been a while. Like, I remember when it came out because Spielberg was one of those directors. As I was growing up, he meant the world to me, and I loved his films, and he was one of those filmmakers that kind of made me want to be a filmmaker. So AI hit like exactly when I went to college, and it was like at that point where it was like, okay, we're going to be discussing these types of movies now. And it was the first time where I ran into kind of a roadblock with people and Steven Spielberg, where it was like amongst cinephiles, it was like there's people who vehemently hate Steven Spielberg and want to bring him down, and those like myself that were just like, wait, what is so bad about Steven Spielberg? I thought he was one of the great filmmakers. And this film tends to be like, the two camps, where the two camps are most fighting with each other, and people thinking that it's Stanley Kubrick's film and Steven Spielberg swept in and kind of ruined his vision, or they took his vision and Spielberg made it a Spielberg film. I don't think I have. It's funny because this film and Minority Report and Catch Me If You Can, he made those three films back to back. And it was like at a point in his career where it's like, I just made Schindler's List, Amistad, and Saving Private Ryan. So do I continue making serious films, or do I fall back and go back to my popcorn entertainment roots? And those three films are like films that are like, they try to go a little deeper, they try to be a little darker than the typical Spielberg fare. However, I would argue some of those moments feel like too much Spielberg saying, look how dark I can be. Whereas if you look at his early films, there's plenty of dark stuff in E.T., there's plenty of dark stuff in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it doesn't seem that way.
He's just so good at balancing the whole, so that you don't necessarily think of him as a director with dark themes. Right?
Yeah.
But I would argue that Catch Me If You Can is the best of those three.
Yes.
In my opinion, if you're just looking at the least flawed film. But I mean, so it is interesting that basically people were saying that Spielberg tacked on this saccharine ending, and the whole first part must be what Spielberg doing his thing. And Spielberg actually said it was the opposite.
Right.
That's right.
Those were Kubrick's things, and it's like, no, he came to me because he identified that my subject matter as being more suited to this film. You know, so it's interesting.
Yeah.
People think they have
And
an
it's
idea.
worth-
Go ahead.
It's worth revisiting some of the history of this as well. So indeed, Kubrick had been working on AI based on a short story for years. I mean, they say perhaps more so than any other project. And indeed, at one point, there were two things that were really, I guess, holding him back. One being from a technical standpoint, that what he envisioned wasn't yet possible with CGI, and it was indeed Jurassic Park that convinced him that the worlds that he wanted to create on screen would now be possible. The other, and I mean, this is the kind of perfectionist that Kubrick was, he wanted to create a literal robot boy because he believed a human actor couldn't play that role, and even had the brilliant music video director Chris Cunningham designing robots that never ended up being exactly what he envisioned. But the other part of this is that Kubrick, because of the heart and the innocence of a child and the child's love for his mother, that there was a heart to this movie that I think he knew was very much in Spielberg's wheelhouse. So they had talked for quite a bit of time about the way in which to partner on this, kind of back and forth as to what those responsibilities would be. But with Kubrick's passing, I believe it was Kubrick's daughter who approached Spielberg about this project. He was ready to do Minority Report with Tom Cruise, and actually went to Tom Cruise and said, I need to wait on this project, and with Cruise's support, really launched into AI. Now, I also wonder very much whether we would have seen what we see in the final product, which is a mashing of styles, and very intentional. And I'd love to talk about, I think, what else Spielberg is trying to say in the film, but a blending and at times a mashing up of styles of these two filmmakers that I find fascinating. And I agree with you completely about Catch Me If You Can being a far more kind of perfect film. AI is far from perfect. I'm not sure, but it's actually those imperfections that I find so incredibly satisfying on a certain level.
That's actually how I was talking about Touch of Evil was like. I don't think it's a perfect film, but I like revel in its imperfections, and I guess it's just that movie for me. But I was gonna first of all, I read that Spielberg was thinking about doing the first Harry Potter, which instead of this, that was something on his plate. But to touch on what you were saying, I think it speaks volumes about Haley Joel Osment's performance and about Spielberg's confidence in Haley Joel Osment that Kubrick didn't think it was possible for a human child to portray this character.
Right.
I mean, it's just amazing. It's beyond his years. And the fact that Jude Law is so good in this, and that it's dwarfed, in my opinion, by Osment's performance, speaks volumes.
Right. And I think, I think people would be more prone to say like The Sixth Sense is Haley Joel Osment's like it was a shining moment, but I do think he's way better. And there's moments in this. I'm not going to say I don't. It's not that I don't like the film. There's things in this film that I think are extraordinary that I love, but there's also things in it that I have issues with. Yeah. But one of the things that I absolutely love is his performance, and in particular the scene where he is driven out to the woods, basically, and left. I mean, it's crazy how emotional it is just because
I have chills
of him.
thinking about the emotional reality of it.
Yeah.
For him.
Yeah.
I believe it. Which the fact that he's playing, I mean, you can feel that he's playing a robot wanting to be human, which reminds me of like Hayden Christensen in Shattered Glass playing someone pretending to be someone to pretend. It's like to be doing that as a child is like really just impressive, intellectual.
And I never knew until it was mentioned in an interview that he doesn't blink the whole movie.
Right.
And I never thought of that, and then watching it, I'm like, holy shit!
And he would
doesn't
practice
blink.
doing that in preparation for the film. I mean,
and I would also argue what's brilliant about his performance is there is a transformation.
I agree.
And so
which is
it's
very
not
Kubrick.
just his ability, early on, to be both convinced that he is artificial, and yet for you over the course of the movie to have such empathy for a machine that by the end of the film, you believe that love. And there are those who go back and forth as to, are you to see him as more or less human by the end? But for that love for his mother to be genuine at the end just speaks to the incredible performance.
Mm-hmm. And I think that because of his performance and because of his journey and that arc that he takes and that transformation that he takes, it's very easy. There's allusions to other Spielberg films throughout this film, but the one that I think this film has the most connection to is Empire of the Sun, because I don't know if you two are familiar with the film, but it's It Too was like, that was Christian Bale in an amazing child performance.
Yep.
But that transformation from a kind of smug, stuck-up boy into this tortured man.
That's a great point.
And just the fact of the whole journey, he's uprooted from his existence, from this posh existence, into basically a hell, and him trying to find his way back to his parents and back to his mother. It's all over this film, and I think that there's not so subtle references to Spielberg's filmography, and then there's very subtle references to Stanley Kubrick's filmography.
Right.
And that's kind of what you were talking about, Matt, was like kind of like this mishmash of kind of different styles. And I don't know if Spielberg had a little bit more distance if he would have done that. I don't know. There's some that don't work for me. Like, I feel like the whole thing about the moon coming over the hill and becoming, it's this, look, I'm using this image that people associate me with warmth and heart, but it turns into
I didn't
something
even
that is.
think about E.T. and the moon.
And literally, the symbol for Amblin Entertainment.
Right, right.
And DreamWorks, actually, for that matter. So what I'm most struck by. So again, thinking that this comes after Kubrick's passing, that it is as much not only I think a love letter to Kubrick, but a processing for Spielberg about what they do as artists. And so this comes back to, if you'll allow me here, the issue that so many people have with what they believe was, okay, here's Spielberg, he doesn't know how to end a movie, and it's just 20, it's an extra 20, it should have ended at the bottom, by the Ferris wheel. That would have been the appropriate dark ending. And we forget, and this is what's the largest theme for the movie, with almost any science fiction, the ultimate question you're asking is, what is it that makes us human? And I believe what Spielberg's really pointing to here is the ability for us. It's our role as storytellers. And remember how this movie starts and ends. You realize at the end of the movie that the narrator to this story, that starts with a voiceover at the very beginning with Ben Kingsley's voice, and ultimately ends with artificial intelligence telling this story and learning that perhaps humanity's greatest gift is our ability to tell stories. And there are these incredible moments for me throughout the film that are getting to that. If you all don't mind, I mean, one, the choice to even use Pinocchio throughout the film, just again, back, even though this is a modern story, it's returning to the same themes. And when you both referred to that moment when Monica leaves David in the woods, and there's this incredible moment where, Mommy, if Pinocchio became a real, and I became a real boy, can I come home? She says, that's just a story, but a story tells, and David says, but a story tells what happens, and Monica runs back to the car and says, stories are not real, you're not real. And yet, at the end of the movie, what you find is the advanced artificial intelligence in digging up, basically the history of humanity and trying to determine what it is, as they begin to tell their own origin story as well in uncovering David. It comes back to this incredible beauty inside storytelling, and what even the Mecha says, which is the movie kind of closes where he says, the narrator is saying, so David went to sleep, and for the first time in his life, he went to that place where dreams are born.
Right.
And this idea of dreaming and storytelling, I think that's what Spielberg was really trying to capture in this love letter to Spielberg, or this love letter to Kubrick, but also the way in which you have such different filmmakers, one who is cold and distant, and one who just leads with his heart perhaps too much, and yet both of them are storytellers.
I totally vibe with what you're saying. I feel like it's a little bit like what Kubrick attempted to tackle with The Shining, where you've got this guy, Stephen King, where it's the same exact philosophical debate, which was like, oh, Stephen King, he feels too much, he doesn't think enough. Oh, Kubrick doesn't feel enough. And it's like this sort of mishmash of styles in which like you end up doing. So it's interesting. You mentioned the Pinocchio thing, and at first the way I took it was like I already get that there's a Pinocchio vein through this story. Do you really need to like have her reading Pinocchio to him? Right. But then the seed did need to be planted narrative-wise for him to be able to have that journey and to be clinging to this. And it's like what you said with the idea of story. It becomes like this whole, it's almost like story is a character. The idea of story is a character in the film.
And also whether or not it is real or it's truth or fiction, that he clings to that story and he needs it to be true and he needs it to be the end all and be all. It's kind of like what Spielberg does with his movies. It's like, I know that there's evil in the world, but I choose to show the humanity of things. It's
almost like he proves to us how cynical a lot of us are. He like confirms our own cynicism and shows it for what it is. It's interesting. You made me actually look at the Dr. No scene in a whole new light now. At first it was like, it felt like he was redoing his DNA scene, right? I don't know, it just felt the same exact way that scene was enacted. But there's actually a desperation to that scene that I'm only now kind of revisiting in my mind of like how much David needs this to work.
Right.
And he's just like, and then Joe helping him. He's like, oh, we'll do this and we'll do that. And the way, I love the specificity of the writing when he goes, and fairy's tale. And he's like so confident. And David's like, no, fairy tale. It's such a great little detail.
Well, and ultimately, what we're talking about is a search for truth. It's not as if it's just this little boy who needs this story to be real. I don't think it's a cynical take on religion, but it's certainly the notion that we are, you think of it as, and I'm not sure Kubrick would go there, but for Spielberg, the idea of as if we consider ourselves God's children, there is a certainty that we need in the world, and indeed we're always looking for our Creator, but not only looking for our Creator, but in our Creator wanting absolute truth so that we need not worry. Then there's a lot of interesting themes, and I think I also I come back to Devon. I think you mentioned this. The parts of the film that people think are Spielberg's and are Kubrick's are the opposite. I mean, some point to the flesh fair as the darkest part of the film. That's the least effective part of the entire film.
I thought it was Spielberg trying to do John Carpenter, but like ineffectively. It felt like he was trying to do something out of the Escape From movies, and it just was not. It had nothing of that to it.
And the darkest parts of the film for me come back to those moments that aren't heavy-handed. They aren't heavy-handed. It's just the pain that you feel for David, or even that moment where he's met Dr. Hobby, but first has confronted another one of himself, and indeed.
That scene is disturbing.
Our Creator has just revealed to us that we aren't unique. But as he sits there and just says, "My brain is falling out," that was devastating to me.
That is a great scene. I mean, when he's looking through the other face, the eyes are shining through the sockets. I mean, just powerful, symbolic imagery.
There's also like the whole ending of the film, which everyone, at the time that it came out, everyone was saying was Spielberg's contribution and Spielberg's ruining of the story. I always, especially when seeing it for the first time, I never, yes, it is very emotional when David finally sees his mother at the end, but I never took it as, oh, this is just a tacked on happy ending. Like, there's a deeper undercurrent of sadness to the scene and tragedy to the scene.
I actually think it's a brilliant ending and a beautiful ending and poignant, because to be given that choice and to be able to choose, like, would you rather this or would you rather have this, and at least have it be pure and at least have your one night.
It's an irrational choice, right? I think it is a choice out of love and
well, it's like what
innocence.
It's like what Hobby talks about in the beginning of the film about love is not made up of sensory signals, and so he's trying to get to it. Like you said, it opens with searching for the definition of love, and searching for that, and him discovering it.
Right.
Ultimately.
Can we create something that openly wants that quest and that
and
nourishment?
I'd argue that that's critical for it to be a child, because there's an innocence and a purity to that love that you see the opposite of that in Dr. Hobby, who ultimately, out of love and a longing to be with his son who he has lost. I mean, it's not as if that character is sympathetic, has mass marketed his son. And most of, if not all of, the adult human characters are treated pretty cynically throughout the film.
What does his mom say? She says, don't talk to any people. And she says, "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the world." And it's interesting because this was his first solo screenplay since Close Encounters. It's like 25 years. And you can feel how deeply personal it is. And it is interesting that there is some of that cynicism in there, because it kind of shows that he's not all rose-colored glasses.
Right.
He really is trying to get to the truth of things sometimes.
Right. And he's certainly, when you think about his Spielberg's backstory, like, he knows how terrible the world is and that he's been affected by it. I think there's actually a genuine, like, affection that I have for him as a filmmaker that he chooses to do the things that he does. Where
It's like Wilder.
yeah,
Same thing.
yeah,
That he,
Yeah, and think about Spielberg's, in terms of Spielberg's view of humanity, it's the children which he treats with such affection and purity. So often,
wow, that is a
you can
thread.
go through
throughout
his
this film.
movies. E.T. is one fine example.
Of course. Yeah.
The adults and the adults are the most are the, if not the villains, just so misguided and lost.
Look at Richard
and
Dreyfuss's
it's-
character in Close Encounters. He's pretty much a kid at heart.
right.
And it's this
Well,
youthful fervor and
But
energy.
he is also a father who abandons his children at the end of the movie.
For people who love the movie, we kind of just pass that off. It's like, oh, that's okay, that's fine. He just completely destroyed his family, but that's fine.
I think it's deep-seated in Spielberg's psychology, who has issues with his parents and divorce.
Right.
That there is something that he's getting at there that's deeply personal, and yet we. So what does it mean that we both celebrate and also somehow have to acknowledge? Wait a second, he just left his family, and will probably not see them again.
Yeah, I think that's what people miss. What I get so upset with people who dismiss Spielberg is he's so great at injecting so much realistic humanity into his characters and into his stories, and certainly Close Encounters has plenty of moments like that, especially the mashed potato scene. But in E.T., like the scene where Dee Wallace, who plays the mother, when they have that moment where it's like, Dad is with his girlfriend in Mexico, and she starts crying, and she can't even stay at the table. She has to go and kind of hide by the sink, and then she just says, well, he hates Mexico, and then just leaves off. And then the brother being so angry with Elliot about, like, why couldn't you just let that go? Like, why did you have to hurt her? It's harsh stuff for a quote unquote family film, and I think that is where his strengths are. And there's plenty of that in here as well. Like, that line about "I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the world." Like that really, watching it this time for this show, like that hit me like really hard. Like, holy crap.
Yeah.
But he does have a way of like injecting those harsh moments into his fairy tales, which is, I think, one of his strengths.
I think that's right. No, I think to refer to them as fairy tales is absolutely right. And yet he sometimes can't help himself, because it's deeply personal. At times he can't help himself in thinking he needs to quote unquote entertain. And God knows he does a fantastic job in entertaining. And yet, for me, there's elements, and I keep coming back to that flesh fair sequence. Why did we need to have Chris Rock make a cameo in a scene like that?
Yeah.
It so struck me as unnecessary, and that whole scene was so heavy-handed. But that, and I imagine, with the motorcycles that feel like dinosaurs through the jungle are some pretty heavy-handed allusions to his own work, but perhaps it's because he's so close to that work, he also can't help but feel the need to entertain that way.
It also seems like, after, I love Schindler's List, and I think he made such a great defining work about the Holocaust and about that evil, that the whole flesh fair scene just seems so stupid.
Yes.
After he already showed how horrific like a concentration camp and a Holocaust can be, that it just almost seems so stupid. Like that whole scene just seemed kind of stupid and so heavy-handed, a way to kind of create that same illusion with this.
I feel like he didn't need to make it its own set piece. Like it didn't have to be this whole chapter in the book. It's like, I mean, I see it as a necessary plot device in order to solidify that connection between Joe and David, because it's like Joe, like he saves Joe's life,
Yep.
and it's like, but does it need to be this whole heavy-handed thing of every single person that was just watching robots get torn to shreds? Every single person in there wants to throw stuff at Brendan Gleeson and completely turns the tide. And it's that thing that sort of moves away from what Spielberg's good at, which is actually knowing how people act. And it's like, it just seems like this contrived thing that just didn't appear.
But was it the question of, so, and Devon, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, so two things. One, and I agree that the moon itself was a little over the top, but that scene of the dumping of parts, I think did enough to tell you the devastation and atrocities occurring in these flesh fairs that I wouldn't have needed to see it.
Even the hint of a flesh fair, actually. They even, the line, I loved the line, the ambiguity of the line, we don't want to have another Trenton or whatever it was. And it's like not even explaining what happened in Trenton. And that easily could have suggested this persecution of robots.
Mm-hmm.
And then.
But here's my question. I mean, I really think I am the first act of that film is to me is absolutely brilliant and actually doesn't feel at all like a typical Spielberg film, and doesn't feel like, certainly not a popcorn film that is going to bring mass audiences.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I just feel as if part of that second act was, okay, you've bared with us on a deeply cynical. Two things. One, we need to give you some pop quickly. But two, like, don't worry. It's not going to be that there is some hope here. So in a quick moment, I will show you what I'm talking about in something that feels very dark. But then, like, oh no, humanity can turn around really quickly, and it just felt cheap. It didn't feel.
Yep.
And so.
I think I agree with you wholeheartedly about the first act of the film, and I think while it certainly doesn't feel like anything Spielberg has done, I think it showcases what Spielberg is best at, and is that the visual storytelling of that whole sequence, that whole act, and how economical he is at laying plot points. And there is this shift, and I when I was in college, I had a professor who went off one day about his issues with AI, and that the first act of the film is a science fiction story, a classic science fiction story, and then it all of a sudden shifts into a fantasy film.
Right.
And that the two can't, you have to make one or the other. You can't make one that is just all of a sudden turns into a fantasy film. And I think that is one of the issues of introducing the Pinocchio theme, is that, Pinocchio is a fantasy film and it's a fantasy story, and maybe that was the issue that Kubrick had with the story, that he felt that Spielberg could help him with. But I think there's histories of writers that worked with Kubrick throughout the duration of how long he was working on this project. And there was one writer in particular, and I can't remember his name, but he was a famed science fiction writer, and he said, and then one day, Stanley came to me and he had the book Pinocchio, and I thought, what are you doing to our story? And it actually caused him to leave.
Brian Ablis, the writer of the short story, who I think even talked to Spielberg and said, don't introduce Pinocchio, that this doesn't need it.
Right. Well, this movie has a lot of the same issues that War of the Worlds had, as far as being uneven. And I mean, the first hour of War of the Worlds is pure gold to me. It's one of the best invasion scenes I've ever seen. Tom Cruise is awesome in it. It just has this, like, you're at the edge of your seat.
I've always said that the that whole sequence of when they first attack and him running through the streets and everything.
Incredible.
I've never been
Some of the best
genuinely
use of
frightened.
effects.
You know?
I mean,
yeah.
and then when Tim Robbins comes in and it just becomes this other film, and it's just like, I don't know, it loses its way. And I think actually this is more successful at righting the ship, so to speak, at the end.
Yeah.
Which that film couldn't, to me.
You know, War of the Worlds is interesting in that I completely agree. If you think of it, and I agree, the second half of the film is a political film. But actually, you know, I think Spielberg has even acknowledged that War of the Worlds was his 9/11 film and trying to process that. And so you have a second half of the film that, like, you know, perhaps if you think of it within those terms, it makes sense, but doing so, you know, goes to it destroys the overall narrative.
It's like The Happening with Shyamalan, the way it's like, oh, this is about 9/11. It just, I don't know. There's a certain, you just need to let those things be. You can't be so overt about it, I feel like, or you're going to bring down the house of cards. It's like, you know.
Yeah.
He has had, and I have had, issues with his films post Schindler's List. Like, I feel like when I look back at the films that I love from Steven Spielberg and that I think that are his masterpieces, like there's an economy of storytelling, and there's just a very raw confidence to his storytelling in those films. Whereas in his later work, you know, from like AI on, he's had these films where there's things in them that I love, and there's a better film that I know that he can make that I wish was the film, but
there's an insecurity to him now that cares, that is a little bit like anxious about making something that everyone's going to love. I don't know. I feel it when I watch his films. The Post, I really felt that when I watched that. Bridge of Spies, there's just a certain, there's sort of a lack of confidence that is there and causes it to be muddled and sprawling, which is never what I would call a Spielberg film, you know? And I guess that's what was fun about Ready Player One, was it's so problematic, but it has this homage to what's fun about movies that is just like, I find to be pure candy, and I can't help, you know? It's just a fun movie.
I actually, like, AI and Ready Player One actually have kind of like similar, especially, like, I love, Matt, that you introduced the idea that it is a film about filmmaking itself and about storytelling itself. And I think that Ready Player One has that same.
I thought of it when you said that, actually. And that's a journey. It's riffing off Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. It's obviously, which is another story of a search, you know, for truth.
Yeah.
So.
And you know, my issue with there is nothing wrong with a movie like Ready Player One that isn't necessarily diving into deeper themes. It's not to say that it isn't exploring issues of storytelling and filmmaking, but I don't think, you know, I for one, to have a movie about nostalgia now felt about 10 years or more too late. Not to say that there weren't some sequences that I had a lot of fun with, but I was pretty dissatisfied with Ready Player One. I think completely agreeing that AI is very flawed. I admire how flawed it is in how deeply, both intellectually and emotionally, it's trying to probe some themes in that that it's interesting. I mean, there's perhaps to the detriment of narrative, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I was thinking in this watch that I had that the ending of the film, if you think that the end of 2001 is that he finds alien life and that they put him basically in a zoo or in a cage and study him and make things look familiar to him.
It's a Bradbury mechanism, you know.
And that the ending of this film, AI, has that same feeling to it, that the mechas are kind of overseeing David and kind of showing, like, making him feel comfortable, giving him exactly what he wants so that they can study him and kind of make what is this history? What is our history now going to be in the future?
Ebert has a pretty great review of it, and he kind of touches on some similar themes of just like he it's interesting, like he really didn't view David's choices as being in any way human. And it's always interesting to see someone's different take on something.
Ebert revisited AI.
Right, I know.
Ebert is one of a few critics who revisited the film and gained a deeper appreciation.
But even in the reprisal, though, he touches on that he doesn't see like the ending as being this like gift to David. Like it was like a study, and it was a clinical study.
And yet, I would argue, and it comes back to the role of the narrator, that you're right. When the narrator is first talking to David and saying, "Well, we've tried to bring humans back to understand them, and it's in purely scientific terms, but they only last they can only stay alive for a day, almost like, well, look, it just from a technical standpoint, it doesn't make sense for us to keep doing this." And I would argue the perspective we're getting from the narrator, both in the beginning of the film and at the end, once David has decided to go to sleep, having spent that day with Mom, is that they have learned something. David has been able to provide a perspective on humanity. Like David is literally, and they even explicitly say he is the
enduring memory
artifact in their scientific perspective of humanity, but there is something greater that they learn. Part of it is his visions that come from love, but it then results in the language they use in recognizing the value of storytelling, which isn't as David early on says, stories tell what happens. That's, from scientific terms, yes, here are all the details, this is exactly what happens, but rather that there's something deeper inside of that, and the story they tell of David is something bigger, it's something important.
Mm-hmm. You still there, bro?
I am.
Okay, cool. It's funny. I just did you guys see Annihilation?
Yes.
I just thought of that for some reason, from your discussion there. Just in the idea of what that being is looking for, and I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that. But.
Well, Annihilation is a perfect example of this tension between creating a film is deeply intellectual, a sci-fi film that is deeply intellectual and probing these incredibly deep themes, but the decision ultimately that mass audience doesn't matter, and thus the way in which they did a limited release. And it is an absolutely brilliant sci-fi film.
It's the type of
films where there are decisions inside of it, back to what we were discussing, where, maybe how do we best position this to reach huge audiences? And in doing so, likely will compromise the kind of intellectual integrity of the film.
It's the type of horror film that Hereditary is. Because I feel like Hereditary never once abandons what it wants to be, and it definitely is polarizing, because there's a lot of people who, before I saw the film, thought it was incredibly slow paced and boring and this and that, whereas I found it completely compelling, and just that's the thing, is it's you commit to what you're doing, and I feel like I actually feel like I've called Spielberg out for not being completely all in sometimes, and I feel like this is actually one where for better or worse, he is. He is all that. I mean, obviously, in the earlier part of his career, he was legendary. But
Matt, I have to tell you about my favorite Devon story where we went to go see Jurassic Park, and afterwards he was just completely upset and turned around.
granted, I had had a few drinks, okay? It may have been the whiskey talking, but I didn't realize the movie had so many just kind of like stringing the plot along scenes. I don't know. I was aware. I became ultra aware of it. I was like, oh, this scene doesn't matter. This scene doesn't matter.
He kept going, and I had to be like, all right, I don't think we have to shit on it this much.
And I realized, because I used to adore that movie, and it's like, I don't know what happened to me. I still love it, but it lost some of its luster for me, seeing it on the big screen. I don't know what it was. I think it was the angle of where we were sitting. But
I will say this about AI
What
is
does
that...
that mean? Go ahead.
No, I will say this about AI is that it is a film that you, at least for myself, where while I can't, throw my arms around it and love it and embrace it fully, it's a film that it sticks in my craw in such a way that I know that I will keep watching it, and I know that each watch will be different, and that I'll see new things in it, and I hope that there's a day where I watch it and I'm like, oh my God, I get it. Like I was wrong. I needed to see it from this viewpoint.
Right.
And listening to you talk about it, Matt, is kind of doing that right now. One of the films, you talked about Annihilation, but I kept thinking about Blade Runner 2049 when I was watching it, because it does have the similar theme of the robot that wants to be a real boy, the Pinocchio theme that runs throughout it, and a film that was polarizing and people either love or hate, or people think it's a mess, but I saw it and I was completely won over by it. And I think that this film will be kind of similar in that it'll be kind of like the opposite for me. Like I'll keep on going back, and one day it'll work.
Matt, go ahead.
I was just going to say I think that's, we can debate the merits of a film in terms of how successful it is in being able to achieve what it sets out to do. And yet, what I am more interested in films, as you've said perfectly, that years later I have to return to, perhaps in part because I'm just troubled with some decisions inside of it, but that says something about the films that stay with us are, for me, the films that matter, because ultimately it's about the way in which it's about those moments after watching the film, not only in terms of how we are kind of playing around, confronting those themes in our own head, but the very nature of the conversations we're having now, and all filmgoers have. It's one thing to be talking about the movie for a few minutes before you get into your car and head back home. It's another when years later you're really wrestling with these movies. Now, that said, Devon, you never convinced me that The Revenant is anything other than crap, but...
Talk about a polarizing movie.
just as an aside, that is a movie where the Ewalt family has had all-out shouting.
Don't worry, you'll come back to that one later in life and just be like, I knew he was onto something. I wanted to. I wanted to ask you. One of the reasons I thought of you to be on this episode was because I remembered you wrote a college paper identifying the usage of architecture in, you might have to say the fourth movie, but Blade Runner, AI, Dark City, and...
I touched on a few other ones. Even the Truman Show, so even beyond science fiction, but the idea of architecture not only for world setting, but even the way in which it plays
Plays what? Matt, are you there? Matt, are you there? Let's just call him back. Yep.
you there?
Hey, yeah.
Okay.
So you were saying world, not
World
just
building.
world
Yeah.
setting, but
So it's interesting. I mean, I think of those sci-fi films where it is the world itself. Even, you know, for those who are harsh critics of Blade Runner, that there's too much focus on world setting and not enough on narrative. In the case of AI, you know, there's an obvious kind of rural suburban versus urban kind of clash, and day and night kind of motifs. And I know that Kubrick had very clear ideas in mind in terms of what Rouge City would look like. But that's another element for me of particularly sci-fi worlds, that even though many of those look so drastically different, that it's getting at the same issues of what is artificial, what is real. So in Dark City, right, this whole notion that as the viewer really trying to struggle with what's going on here. I'm confused by the time setting and even the characters themselves that are unaware of how artificial this world is. So and in a film like Truman Show, which clearly has some sci-fi elements to it, because it's ultimately asking some of those same questions about reality, and is the greater choice to be, you know, to step out that door not knowing what world and what darkness is going to confront you, or stay inside the cave,
right.
in the darkness, because you're content and you know what, or at least you have defined for yourself a level of contentness because you don't know what else there is.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's.
Go ahead.
I think that's I was going to say. I mean, I think that's what's another theme inside of AI as well, right? For a child who early on is content in part because he's unaware of pain, as humans would define it. But I mean, even the artificial intelligence at the end of the film acknowledge you've experienced so little happiness in your life.
You know,
that was another thing for me that was just so compelling, is that child, that quote unquote innocence that we attribute to a child, is an innocence that for David makes that choice at the end of, I'd rather experience this one day that may perhaps not give me the happiness that I would ultimately like, but is something, and it's something that I value more than anything else. And with that is in fact a choice that he kind of ends his life after that moment, which I think speaks to part of that darkness at the end of the film that you don't really think of.
You know, I was just going to say, there's that one scene at the party, the birthday party, where I think it really speaks volumes about how Spielberg wants us to view this character as, whether it does have humanity or whether it doesn't, with how he films the scene, of the fact that he films after Martin and David both fall to the bottom. When Martin is saved, filming it from below and seeing it from David's perspective really just shows you how Spielberg feels about David. He could have filmed it through the water. He could have filmed David at the bottom and done like a push onto his face. Instead, it was like, no, this isn't like, he's on David's side. Like,
and there's also like, you know, there's a shot in Catch Me If You Can when he he comes back from being away, and he goes to see his mom, and there's a shot of him looking into the window from the outside, and you see this family scene play out where I think they're either having dinner no, it's Christmas, and they're opening presents and everything, and it's him being the outsider looking in at this family that he wants so badly,
Right.
but they want nothing to do with him, and he's forced outside into the darkness, and it's like the same thing,
Yeah.
like, you know,
And that
I'm
all he
more
ultimately
concerned with
wants
Martin than I am
is
with David down at the bottom.
Right.
Sorry, Matt, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was just going to say I love the comparisons there, because I think you think of Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Catch Me If You Can, and the importance of even Tom Hanks as an additional father figure.
Yep.
He's a child. You know, and what he wants more than anything else is love, and it's something that he isn't able to obtain. And so that idea of and it's one of those themes that we see through so many of Spielberg's films, and there's both an innocence to it that may seem naive, and yet it's something that I think never goes away. It's not as if we as adults aren't still seeking that.
I just wanted to touch real quick on something, because you by talking about that Catch Me If You Can there, I realized how similar Shattered Glass is, in the sense that Hayden Christensen's character is lying and telling these stories because he is a child, because he literally needs this vindication of, he just wants to, I don't know, I never realized how similar those characters are.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I always think about AI, Minority Report, and Catch Me If You Can as kind of being like this loose trilogy, because all three characters are really lost children. And I know that that's a theme that Spielberg plays with throughout his career, but these three films in particular, I mean, it just deals with characters that are forced out of their familiar units, and are kind of forced on this journey to kind of find a way back, and neither of the characters can ultimately do it, really. But they just have to kind of find their own way. But I do think that it would be interesting to kind of watch all three films all together, or at least, you know, over the course of 3 nights, and just see how similar they really are. Because I do.
And in all three, you have, you know, I think even Spielberg has referred to them in one way or another as they're running. Right? In all three films, it's those characters are running away. They are being chased in all three films, but there's some broader themes at play for sure. Interestingly, with Minority Report, you get the perspective of a father who has lost a son.
Yep.
But you know, again, coming back to many of those themes that Spielberg returns to time and time again.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in essence, isn't that what AI is about? Isn't Dr. Hobby lost a son,
Yep.
and he keeps creating his son over and over again in an
That's right.
effort to retain him.
And think about Christopher Walken's character in Catch Me If You Can.
It's funny because it's like the one where Spielberg completely strikes out to me is the one that's blatantly about lost children, Hook. You know, it's funny that it's like he says, "I'm going full hog here. This is what it's about." It's just like, no, you just missed the mark there. But just in my
But with
opinion.
Hook, you know, there is also such an established story there that it's hard to add I would imagine it's hard to add your personal narrative and themes inside of a story that's, look, it's Hook. You can do a few things around the edges, but that's the story. Whereas with AI and even, you know, Minority Report, which was Minority Report, a short story from Philip K. Dick.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Yes.
And Catch Me If You Can. There's so much more that Spielberg can do to make it his own,
Right.
that brings some real authenticity to those themes.
Well, and you know, even with Hook, though, we still get one of the most just like charismatic performances from Robin Williams ever, and it still has to be appreciated for what it is, you know.
And I think
It's certainly in terms of a childhood innocence too,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Probably getting close here.
yeah. No, Matt, thank you very much. I have
Yeah.
enjoyed the hell out of this conversation. It's,
No, I appreciate you're both bearing with me, communicating by phone, but I
Oh,
really
no,
mean
no.
it. I'm a huge fan of what the two of you were able to do in such a nuanced conversation about films and themes inside and appreciation for the craft. So I'm just honored to be able to join you guys for this conversation.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we will definitely have you back, Matt. This worked out well. This is the first time that we did anything like this, so yeah, we'll do it again for sure.
I'm looking forward to it, guys.
Awesome, man.
All right, thank you again. My name is David Metzger.
I'm Devon Ewalt.
And this is Matt.
All right, catch us next week. We're going to be finishing off this season by talking about one of my favorite genres, the road movie. So we'll be talking about some of our favorites. Catch us next week. Thank you.